Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive into JFK assassination research. This time we're going back to 1998, and we're cracking open the spring issue of the Kennedy Assassination Chronicles.
Oh, wow, 1998. That was a really pivotal year for JFK research, with all the documents being released from the Assassination Records Review Board.
Right, so this issue of the Chronicles is like a snapshot of what researchers were focused on at that time, new leads they were pursuing, and theories that were generating a lot of buzz back then. So instead of rehashing, the same old grassy knoll debates, we're going to dive into some of the lesser-known aspects of the case, the ones that don't always get as much attention.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so let's start with something I found particularly intriguing. The idea of a JFK Amnesty Commission. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I remember reading about that in the Chronicles. It was a pretty controversial proposal.
For sure. So basically the idea was to model it after South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Yeah, the one where people who committed crimes during apartheid could come forward, confess, and receive amnesty, even if what they did was really awful, as long as they told the whole truth and it was, politically motivated.
Right. And the thinking with the JFK Amnesty Commission was that maybe if people involved in the assassination, even those in really high places, were offered immunity from prosecution, they might finally be willing to come clean and reveal what they knew.
Yeah, but that's a big if. There were definitely concerns about whether people would actually tell the truth, or if they might just make up stories to get themselves off the hook.
Yeah, I can see that. And of course, it raises all sorts of ethical questions about whether it's right to let people get away with potentially serious crimes,
Right.
even if it means getting closer to the truth about JFK's death.
Absolutely. And you have to remember the South African context was pretty unique. They were dealing with decades of systemic racism and oppression. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was seen as a way to help the country heal and move forward. It's not clear if that same approach would have worked in the context of the JFK assassination.
Yeah, that's a good point. So in 1998, there was actually a group called the JFK Amnesty Task Force that was actively pushing for this commission, but it never really gained much traction.
Yeah, it's a shame. It would have been really interesting to see how it played out, although I'm not sure if it would have actually led to any real breakthroughs.
Well, who knows? It's one of those what-ifs that we'll never really know the answer to. But speaking of intriguing leads, let's talk about this mysterious fingerprint that was found at the Texas School Book Depository.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
The Chronicles mention a researcher named Lyle Sardi who was trying to match this fingerprint to a guy named Malcolm Wallace. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Malcolm Wallace was an associate of Lyndon B. Johnson, and he had a murder conviction in his past.
Wait, are we talking about the same Lyndon B. Johnson who became president after Kennedy? Wow, this is getting juicy.
Yeah, it definitely suggests a possible connection there. And the Chronicles don't shy away from exploring that angle. If that fingerprint did indeed belong to Wallace, it would imply that someone connected to LBJ might have been involved in the assassination.
Talk about a bombshell.
And it would raise some serious questions about how thoroughly the original investigation was conducted. Or maybe even if there was an intentional effort to cover something up. And get this, the fingerprint analysis was still ongoing when this issue of the Chronicles came out in 1998. So they leave us hanging.
That's how they get, yeah?
All right, let's move on to another fascinating story from the Chronicles. This one involves a former Army codebreaker named Eugene Dinkin, who claimed to have foreknowledge of the assassination.
Foreknowledge? How is that even possible?
Well, according to Dinkin, he intercepted some communications that hinted at a plot to kill Kennedy. And he believes those communications might have been from the French OAS, the Organisation Armée Secrète, which was a right-wing paramilitary group that was active in France at the time.
The OAS, weren't they pretty hardcore? Like opposed to Kennedy's policies on Algeria and Cuba?
Yeah, they definitely had their reasons to be unhappy with Kennedy. And some researchers believe they might have been involved in the assassination plot. So if Dinkin's story is true, he might have stumbled upon their plans while he was decoding messages.
That's incredible. But is his story credible?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? There's no doubt that Dinkin had a fascinating background, and he definitely had access to sensitive information. He even claimed to have written a letter to Robert Kennedy, warning him about the assassination attempt.
Wow. So what happened to him?
Well, this is where things get even more intriguing. Dinkin was later hospitalized and deemed psychologically unfit, which some people believe was a way to discredit him and silence his story.
Classic conspiracy stuff.
Right. And to add another layer to this whole thing, Jim Garrison, the New Orleans district attorney, who was known for his own controversial investigation into the JFK assassination, was reportedly looking into Dinkin's case.
So we have a potential whistleblower
Hmm.
who might have had key information about the assassination plot, silenced and labeled as crazy, and his story be investigated by a guy who already believed there was a conspiracy. That's like something out of a spy movie.
He definitely has all the elements of a good thriller.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show how deep this rabbit hole goes. There are so many layers to this story and so many unanswered questions.
It's what keeps us coming back for more.
All right, so we've talked about the JFK Amnesty Commission.
Yeah.
The mysterious fingerprint at the Texas School Book Depository, and the intriguing story of Eugene Dinkin. But there's so much more to unpack in this issue of the Chronicles. We're just scratching the surface here.
I'm ready for more.
Well, then let's keep digging. Next, we're going to talk about Mary Farrell. She was a researcher who dedicated her life to compiling chronologies of events related to the JFK assassination.
Mary Farrell. Now that's a name every JFK researcher knows. She was a true pioneer.
Yeah, they mentioned in the Chronicles that she had over 40,000 index cards filled with information about the case. And she referenced tens of thousands of pages of intelligence documents.
That's insane. I mean, can you imagine the dedication to go through all that material, especially back then before the internet?
It's mind-boggling, and it just shows how deep some of these researchers went. They weren't just reading a few books and articles. They were immersing themselves in this case, trying to piece together every detail.
Yeah, they were like detectives, following every lead,
Yeah.
no matter how small.
Right. And Mary Farrell wasn't just hoarding all this information for herself. She wanted to share it with others. The Chronicles mentioned that she was working with other researchers, like Anna Marie Coons-Walco, to create searchable databases from thousands of pages of documents.
That's amazing. Making all that information accessible to other researchers, it must have been a huge undertaking.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of those documents were full of redactions, so they had to really work hard to decipher what was there.
It's inspiring to see that level of collaboration and dedication. It shows how passionate they were about getting to the truth.
Absolutely. And this spirit of collaboration is really evident throughout the Chronicles. They talk about these conferences that researchers were attending, where they would present their latest findings, debate different theories, and just share their knowledge with each other.
Those conferences were like the breeding ground for new ideas and research. It was a chance for the best minds in JFK research to come together and really push the envelope.
Yeah, it was a community of people who were united by this shared desire to understand what really happened in Dallas. And they weren't afraid to challenge each other, to question each other's assumptions, and to really dig deep into the evidence.
That's how you get to the truth. By being open to different perspectives, and by not being afraid to ask tough questions.
Okay, so remember that unidentified fingerprint we talked about earlier, the one we were trying to match to Malcolm Wallace? Well, the Chronicles go into more detail about that. They mention a team led by Walt Brown, who were convinced that Wallace was involved in the assassination.
Walt Brown. He was a real bulldog when it came to JFK research. He wasn't afraid to step on toes.
Yeah, he was known for being very thorough and meticulous. And he wasn't afraid to go up against the establishment. His team was doing some serious detective work, interviewing people who knew Wallace, tracking his movements in the days leading up to the assassination, and trying to piece together his connections.
It sounds like they were really digging deep.
Oh, yeah. They even mentioned a former girlfriend of Wallace, who gave them some key information about his supposed role in the plot.
Now that's interesting.
And here's where things get even more intriguing. Brown's team claimed that Wallace was working with a woman named Ruth Ann on the day of the assassination, and they believed they were positioned on the 6th floor of the Daltex building.
The Daltex building. That's across the street from the book depository, right?
Exactly. So they're suggesting that there might have been multiple shooters involved.
Whoa, that changes everything.
It definitely throws a wrench into the lone gunman theory, and it raises the possibility of a coordinated attack.
So how did they come to that conclusion?
Well, they described this elaborate scenario where Wallace and Ruth Ann were firing from the Daltex building, while another guy, who they called Mr. Factor, was positioned on the 6th floor of the book depository near the sniper's nest.
Mr. Factor. Who is this guy?
That's a good question. The Chronicles don't really go into much detail about him, but they imply that he was part of the conspiracy, and that he might have been the one who actually fired the fatal shots.
So they believe there were at least 3 shooters.
That's what they're suggesting. And to back up their claim, they point to those unidentified fingerprints that were found on book cartons near the sniper's nest. They were convinced that those prints belonged to either Wallace or Mr. Factor, and they were working hard to get hold of official fingerprint records to try and confirm their suspicions.
It's amazing how determined they were to follow every lead, no matter how difficult it was.
It's a testament to their dedication to the truth. They weren't just armchair detectives. They were out there in the field, gathering evidence and trying to piece together what really happened.
It makes you wonder what else is out there. What other clues might be hidden, just waiting to be discovered?
That's a good question, and it's one that we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into this issue of the Chronicles. But for now, let's shift our focus back to Eugene Dinkin, the codebreaker, who claimed to have known about the assassination beforehand.
Okay. Remind me again what his story was.
So Dinkin claimed that he intercepted some communications that hinted at a plot to kill Kennedy. And he believed those communications might have been from the French OAS, which was a right-wing paramilitary group that was unhappy with Kennedy's policies. Now, one of the things that made people question Dinkin's story was that he supposedly warned Robert Kennedy about the assassination attempt. But he gave the wrong date. He said it was going to happen on November 28th, 1963. But the assassination actually happened on the 22nd.
That is strange.
Yeah. So some people saw that as proof that Dinkin was unreliable. But those who believe his story argue that the wrong date was actually a deliberate misinformation tactic, something to throw off investigators.
Oh, so it's like a double bluff.
Exactly. It's a puzzle within a puzzle. And to make things even more complicated, Dinkin's story connects back to the French OAS.
How so?
The Chronicles suggest that the communications Dinkin intercepted might have been from the OAS, revealing their involvement in the assassination plot.
So we have a disgruntled ex-Marine with possible ties to the Soviets, a shadowy group of French extremists, and a whole network of intelligence agencies with their own agendas.
This is getting very complex.
It's definitely not a simple story, and it's one that has kept researchers busy for decades.
And it's not over yet. Not by a long shot. But to understand the full scope of Dinkin's story, we need to go back to his time in the Army and the events that led him to believe there was a plot to kill Kennedy.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So Dinkin was stationed in France, where he worked as a codebreaker. And during his time there, he claims to have intercepted some very disturbing messages.
Disturbing in what way?
Well, he said they were encrypted communications that hinted at a plan to assassinate President Kennedy.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, it's a bombshell. And it's something that Dinkin couldn't ignore. He felt a moral obligation to do something, so he tried to warn the authorities.
But what happened?
Well, according to Dinkin, his superiors brushed him off. They didn't believe his story. They told him to keep quiet.
Wow, they didn't take him seriously at all.
Apparently not. But Dinkin wasn't going to give up that easily. He felt like he had to do something. So he decided to write a letter to Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General at the time, warning him about the assassination plot.
I wonder if that letter ever reached Robert Kennedy.
That's another mystery. There's no record of it ever being found. But some researchers believe that it might still be out there somewhere, hidden away in some government archive.
It would be amazing if it ever surfaced.
It would definitely be a major discovery. But even without the letter, Dinkin's story is still incredibly compelling. It raises all sorts of questions about what the government knew and when they knew it.
Yeah. If Dinkin was telling the truth, it means that someone in a position of power knew about the assassination plot and did nothing to stop it.
That's a very disturbing thought. And it's one that has haunted researchers for years.
It's hard to wrap your head around it.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's a reality that we have to confront if we want to get to the bottom of this case.
I agree.
So let's keep digging and see what else we can uncover about Eugene Dinkin and his role in this whole saga.
Alrighty.
All right. Now, after Dinkin left the Army, he continued to investigate the JFK assassination. He was convinced that there was more to the story than what the Warren Commission had concluded.
The Warren Commission, that's the group that conducted the official investigation, right?
Right. And they concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. But Dinkin didn't buy it. He believed that there was a conspiracy and that Oswald was just a patsy.
So what did he do about it?
Well, he started doing his own research. He interviewed witnesses, he pored over documents, and he even traveled to Dallas to visit the site of the assassination.
He was like a one-man investigation team.
He was. And he was very thorough. He wanted to leave no stone unturned.
So what did he find?
Well, he uncovered a lot of information that contradicted the official story. For example, he found evidence that there were multiple shooters involved and that Oswald might have been set up.
That's incredible.
It is, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. Dinkin had a whole mountain of evidence that he was trying to piece together.
So what happened to all that evidence?
That's another mystery. After Dinkin died in 1996, His files disappeared.
What? They just vanished?
Yeah, it's like they were erased.
That's so strange.
It is, and it's very suspicious.
I wonder who took them.
That's the question, isn't it? Some people believe that the government might have confiscated them to prevent the information from getting out.
It wouldn't be the first time.
Right. But we'll probably never know for sure.
It's frustrating.
It is. But that's the nature of this case. There are so many unanswered questions and so many mysteries.
It's what keeps us coming back for more.
Absolutely. So let's take a break here, and we'll pick up the story of Eugene Dinkin in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned. Okay, so we've been talking about some pretty high-level theories and conspiracies surrounding JFK's assassination. But this issue of the Chronicles also dives into some of the more technical, nitty-gritty details of the research.
Oh, yeah. It gives us a glimpse into the kind of meticulous work these researchers were doing back then, like real detective work.
Exactly. So one of the researchers highlighted is David Lifton, and he was really focused on what happened to Kennedy's body after the assassination.
David Lifton. Oh, yeah. He wrote that book, Best Evidence, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the one. His whole theory revolves around the idea that Kennedy's body was tampered with somewhere between Dallas and Washington, D.C.
Tampered with, like, how?
Well, Lifton believed that the autopsy results were faked and that someone messed with the president's wounds to make it look like Oswald acted alone, like they were trying to cover something up.
Whoa, that's a pretty serious accusation. Is there any evidence to back that up?
Well, Lifton pointed to things like conflicting witness testimonies about the condition of Kennedy's body, inconsistencies in the official reports, and he also questioned the chain of custody of the body, suggesting there were opportunities for someone to alter the evidence.
Yeah, I guess when you're dealing with something as high profile as a presidential assassination, you got to consider all possibilities.
Right, and Lifton's work really highlights how these researchers were looking at every angle, every detail, no matter how small, to try and find the truth. They weren't just satisfied with the official story. They wanted to dig deeper and challenge the accepted narrative.
It's like they were obsessed with getting to the bottom of it.
Totally. And that obsession leads us to another interesting point in the Chronicles, the debate about the backyard photos of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Oh, yeah, those photos where he's posing with the rifle and the Marxist newspaper, the ones the Warren Commission used to paint him as a communist sympathizer.
Exactly. Those are the ones. But the Chronicles suggest that not everyone was convinced those photos were authentic.
Really? There were people who thought they were faked?
Yeah, some researchers believe they were staged either to frame Oswald or to fit a predetermined narrative about him being the lone gunman.
So what were their arguments against the photos?
Well, they pointed to things like inconsistencies in the shadows and Oswald's posture. They thought his pose looked unnatural and suggested the images might have been manipulated.
Interesting. And I remember reading about a researcher named Jack White who used some pretty advanced techniques to analyze the photos.
Yeah, Jack White, he claimed to have found evidence of tampering using things like photogrammetry and densitometry.
It's amazing how these researchers were using every tool available to them, even cutting-edge technology, to scrutinize the evidence and challenge the official story.
Yeah, they were real pioneers in that sense. And it makes you wonder how much of what we think we know about the JFK assassination is actually based on solid evidence, and how much might be the result of manipulation, misinformation, or just plain bad investigation.
Right. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces might be missing or deliberately altered.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key area of research highlighted in the Chronicles, the single bullet theory.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one. The idea that a single bullet fired from Oswald's rifle hit both President Kennedy and Governor Connally.
Right. It was a central part of the Warren Commission's conclusion that Oswald acted alone. But a lot of people found it hard to believe.
Yeah, one bullet causing all those wounds, it does seem pretty far-fetched.
And the Chronicles mention a researcher named John Armstrong, who was particularly dedicated to debunking the single bullet theory.
John Armstrong, I've heard that name before. Wasn't he like a ballistics expert or something?
Yeah, he had a background in physics, and he meticulously analyzed the evidence, the trajectory of the bullet, the location of the wounds, and the physics involved, and he just couldn't make it work.
So he was using science to challenge the official story?
Precisely. He was applying his knowledge of ballistics and anatomy to demonstrate that the official explanation just didn't add up.
That's pretty impressive, using science to poke holes in the government's narrative.
Yeah. And it's a reminder that sometimes you have to look beyond the official reports and the mainstream media to get to the truth.
You got to be willing to dig deeper, ask tough questions, and not be afraid to challenge authority.
Absolutely. And that's what these researchers were all about. They were driven by a deep belief that the truth was out there and they were willing to put in the time, effort, and even risk their reputations to find it.
They were like truth warriors fighting against a system that wanted to keep the real story hidden.
And their work continues to inspire us today to keep asking questions, keep searching for answers, and never give up on the pursuit of truth. Man, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the Kennedy Assassination Chronicles from spring 1998. It's been wild exploring all these different theories and the lengths these researchers went to uncover the truth.
It's really a testament to their dedication and passion. They weren't just casually interested. They were truly committed to uncovering what they believed was a massive cover-up.
Yeah, it's clear they weren't satisfied with the official story, and they were determined to dig deeper. One thing that struck me was how the Chronicles also focused on the human impact of the assassination. Not just the cold, hard facts, but also the emotional toll it took on individuals' families and the nation as a whole.
Right, like the stories about the Secret Service agents who were assigned to protect Kennedy, they must have felt such immense guilt and responsibility after the assassination, knowing they were supposed to keep him safe.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think about. And the Chronicles also talk about how the assassination shattered a sense of innocence and security for many Americans, leading to a period of disillusionment and mistrust.
It's like a collective trauma that the nation had to grapple with.
Absolutely. And this issue of the Chronicles reflects that shift. They talk about how the media played a role in shaping public perception of the assassination, and how some researchers believe certain information was being suppressed or distorted to protect the official narrative.
It's a classic case of questioning the powers that be and demanding transparency.
Yeah, and the Chronicles definitely encouraged that kind of critical thinking. They urged readers to delve deeper into the source material, to question everything, and to form their own conclusions based on the evidence.
They weren't afraid to present alternative theories and challenge the status quo.
Exactly, and that's what makes this publication so valuable. It's a reminder that history is never truly settled. There's always more to learn, more to discover, and more to question.
Especially when it comes to something as complex and controversial as the JFK assassination.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the biggest takeaway is that the search for truth is an ongoing journey.
It's not about reaching a definitive answer. It's about constantly questioning, evaluating, and being open to new information.
Exactly. And publications like the Kennedy Assassination Chronicles provide an invaluable resource for anyone who wants to embark on that journey. They offer a glimpse into the minds of those who dedicated their lives to unraveling one of the biggest mysteries of the 20th century.
And their work continues to inspire us today to keep asking questions, keep digging for answers, and never give up on the pursuit of truth.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Kennedy Assassination Chronicles from spring 1998. It's been a fascinating exploration of a pivotal moment in American history and the enduring mystery that continues to captivate and intrigue us today.
Until next time,